I Testify is about testifying of what Jesus Christ has done and can do in each of our lives. Through testimony of people just like you and through study of His Word, our prayer is to encourage each follower of Christ to be a light in this world. So let your light shine before men, that they may see your good works and glorify your Father which is in heaven. Matthew 5:16. Hello everyone, and welcome to I Testify. Today we have with us our friend Oliver Bragg, and he is currently in the School of Public Health at Loma Linda University, and he's here to tell us how he developed personal faith in the Lord. Thank you.
It's good to be here.
For coming. So tell us first, what was your life like growing up? Were you a Seventh-day Adventist? Were you a Christian?
Growing up, yes. My mom became an Adventist when I was 4 years old. I have 3 other sisters. 2 of them were born at that time, 1 of them wasn't. My mom had been grown up Catholic and was seeking to deepen her relationship with God and have some questions answered that the priest couldn't answer for her. And she eventually went to a Pentecostal church, and from Pentecostal church, she met a woman in a laundromat who was, just the way she acted, made my mom interested in who this woman was. I found out later that this woman was a Seventh-day Adventist. She developed a relationship with my mother, and through Bible studies, my mom became an Adventist, was baptized when I was 4 years old, and we began going to the Adventist church then. And I think it's remarkable because it was really in this way that the woman handled herself, the way she lived her life, that drew my mom to want to know more about Jesus and more about her faith.
What were a couple specifics of, I mean, that's quite a place to meet someone in a laundromat and then you develop a friendship there. Can you tell us a little more about how the woman was? Yeah,
my mom had actually seen her around town a couple times and had seen this woman's patience with her children, and had seen how the woman carried herself. And so I always like to say to people, you know, you can do your laundry like Jesus did, because in the way this woman handled herself and did her laundry and was with her kids, my mom saw Christ in those actions and ultimately led her to deepen a relationship with Christ and bring us as children into a good environment and into the Seventh-day Adventist Church.
It's funny you would mention that, because when Jesus left the tomb after his resurrection, he did fold his laundry.
This is very true, and I think that's a good illustration of that.
So your mom was seeking something. She was seeking for her questions to be answered that the church that she belonged to couldn't answer.
Exactly.
And then did she find that in the Seventh-day Adventist Church?
Yeah. As going through Bible studies, I was really too young to remember exactly all the details that happened, but the questions she had began to be answered. And it made sense to her as she was going through, say, the Sabbath and the state of the dead, and other, issues, doctrines on, Jesus Christ and God. And these things made sense to her, and she was ready to commit, her life to these beliefs that she began to hold dear. And my father was also seeking. He had grown up in a non-religious home, and but for him, Christianity didn't meet that at the time at all. So we began to live kind of with my father with his own beliefs, which my father is a very good man, just didn't ascribe to the Christian faith. And then my mom, who was pulling us to church every Saturday. So it did create, in some ways, a little bit of tension in the home as things began to change. Drastically for us as my mom came into the faith. Yeah.
Was your dad Catholic then?
No, my father, he grew up just no religion in his home, and he was seeking kind of in just other, maybe more Eastern type beliefs and in other areas. So just generally seeking for some sort of faith, but at the time I never found it within Christianity.
So you're growing up in this home that isn't unified, spiritual-wise.
Yeah.
How did your siblings and yourself, how did you deal with that?
The great thing about the church that we came into was that it really takes a church to raise a child, and they did just that. They gave us, all these Bible story books and Bible story tapes, And my mom began to teach us, every night from those Bible story books, Bible story tapes, and really begin to ingrain in us the principles of a Christian life. And these principles found within the Bible, I believe they, at least within my life and the life of my sisters, really ran really deep. And we never really had a struggle until maybe some of us got older in the high school age with wanting to be in church or wanting to be a good Christian. And we all got baptized around 11, 12, 13 years old, and we all had a deep desire to know God. It was when I entered into my early preteen and teenage years that I began to struggle more with my faith and what it meant to be a Christian and what it meant to know God.
Did you see an effect of what your mother was teaching you and how you guys were living your life on your father at the time? Do you feel like there was an effect?
I believe there was. I mean, anytime anyone brings, asks God into their life, the only thing it can do is change not only yourself, but I believe it can change others in your interactions. I think you see that in the life of Christ. So connected with the Father, and everyone that he worked with was ministered to in some way. And my father today, I believe, knows Jesus Christ, but hasn't made the decision yet, public decision to follow him. And growing up, my father allowed us to go to church, allowed us to go to a Christian school, which we started doing, and made a lot of sacrifices so that he could keep, so there could be peace in the home. And I believe that is the work of Christ, to keep peace and to make peace. And even though my father wasn't ascribing to the belief of the Christian belief, he was able to make it work.
And he certainly was witnessed to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's nice.
So at some point you had a transition where you had to make a decision when, Christianity became personalized for you young, but you really had a dividing point in your life where you had to make a decision one way or the other regarding school. So why don't you tell us about that?
Yeah, well, I had, like I said, in the home, my father is also, a rock musician. I grew up with kind of both worlds, and it got to a point where in my teen years, I was listening to a lot of things that just weren't great for a Christian to be listening to, watching the things that probably shouldn't have been watching. And I had a dream one night that those CDs that I was listening to was placed in my hand, and then I was brought over to a wastebasket. And I couldn't surrender these items that I had in my hand. I couldn't throw them away. It seemed like there was a power, a force stronger than me that was controlling me and keeping them in my hand. And finally, I threw them all into the wastebasket, and I had peace. And I woke up at that moment, and I ran out of my bedroom because it was the morning, and my mom was there having her devotions like she did every morning. And I told her what I had just dreamed, and she told me that she had been praying for me that would happen in my life. So there was definitely things that were holding me back. I also played football my 9th grade year of high school, did well at that, loved it. But something was moving in my heart to make a decision to give that up, that there was something better than what the world had to offer. I also was struggling with depression, heavy depression. And Psalms 30 verse 5 is something that I look back to now and really look at that. And it talks about that in the favor of God, there is life. In his favor, there is life. And it says, weeping may endure for a night, but joy cometh in the morning. And I really wanted to be in the favor of God. I really wanted to do what he wanted me to do. And when I made the decision to go to Oklahoma Academy, it was something that I didn't necessarily want to do, but that I felt God was driving me or pushing me to go towards this academy that was a Christian school that I would be going to.
So you were living in New Hampshire.
Yes.
How did you even hear about Oklahoma Academy, and what drew you to it to even consider it?
That's a good question. We had a limited knowledge of, I guess, the Adventist system and how big it was, how global it was. My mom had heard from through someone else, of a child or her child that had gone through the school and how it was a good Christian school. And that's what my mom wanted. My mom had prayed to God that if anything was to happen to her, her kids would have a good foundation in Jesus Christ. And when she heard about the school that follow these principles, she knew that that might be a safe place to send us away for academy. And going away, leaving my home was one of the best decisions that that I ever made, because it allowed me to basically leave the surroundings that I had placed in front of me that were distracting me from that relationship with God.
So Oklahoma Academy is a boarding school.
It's a boarding school, yes.
And then going there, you were surrounded by a new environment. So, but that also means that you had to make your own decisions.
Exactly. Oklahoma Academy is a boarding school. It's a little bit outside of Oklahoma City. And so you're there all the time. You really can't leave that often to go home. You have to make your own decisions, but I was now in an environment that was really conducive to spiritual growth. We would have Bible classes, and we had this program that I had never heard about, except from my sister who had gone the year earlier, called Messiah's Mansion. And it was a life-scale tabernacle, or a life-scale built-to-size tabernacle of what we find in the book of Exodus and Leviticus. So the tabernacle that Moses and the children of Israelites built in the wilderness, that's what we had. And I didn't know much about it. I had read about it. But every class within the academy had the opportunity to go on an exhibit. So you have this big kind of like museum, life-scale model of the tabernacle museum, but the design was that the students would actually lead people through tours of the exhibit. This was totally a new concept to me, but it was something that, surprisingly, I was extremely interested in. And I was deathly afraid of public speaking and being in front. Still don't particularly enjoy it today, but I just, something was in my heart was telling me, like, this is what I need to do. And I remember I learned my tour, the first sophomore student to learn his tour, and began to give tours when the exhibit went out on display to different cities.
So how long do you do this for, and how many cities do you go to?
Well, the exhibit at that time was operating, was probably doing about 8 to 10, or I'd say she's 6 to 10 exhibits a year. And we would do as students maybe 1 or 2. And if you want to, you could also work in the summer. My first exhibit was in Texarkana, Texas, and with a limited understanding of you know, maybe the Christian faith and doctrine and on the sanctuary. And I should explain to maybe our viewers that, you know, within the sanctuary, it tells the whole plan of salvation. It tells Christ from his earthly ministry into his heavenly ministry. And then we find a transition in the Bible to the most holy place where Christ is working now, you know, interceding on our behalf. And that moved me. And I don't think there was any student that was in school that didn't move them to want a deeper relationship with Christ, because they understood what Christ was presently doing, and that had a present implication on their life. And then by sharing this message to other people, I mean, there'd be between, you know, 15 and 50 or 100 people that you would be giving a tour to. Some wouldn't even know anything about the Christian faith, but for some reason, going through the sanctuary and showing them the plan of salvation from Christ's work on earth and to his work in heaven that we see explained well in the book of Hebrews, they would also want to know more about Jesus Christ. So it had a dual effect. It worked on us as students, and especially me, and then it worked on the people that were coming. Many people after every tour would sign up for Bible studies to want to deepen the relationship with Christ.
What I find fascinating about Messiah's Mansion, because I think early in my Christian faith, I was introduced to Messiah's Mansion. It was down in San Diego, I think in 2008, around that time. And I didn't have an appreciation. I figured this was a normal thing. Like this is something that we have all the time, because this was not like this big event. But what I found impressive was that there were kids leading it out. I was like,
yeah,
wow, these are like 15, 16-year-olds that have a really huge grasp of the sanctuary, and I'm basically learning it from them as well as on my own. I'm thinking, wow, how many kids can teach this, much less be able to speak to not only their peers, but adults in an authoritative manner on a subject, and then compared to the world who's, I mean, most kids can barely get out of bed and go to school in the morning. You guys are leading out in a huge huge. I mean, you got to show pictures because it's pretty awesome.
Yeah. Let me switch through and show some pictures here. This is actually in Florida at the time of this picture. This is kind of an aerial view of the sanctuary setup. And as you see the chairs there, that's actually where people sit and are shown inside. So you have the courtyard here. That's looking through the altar of sacrifice in the courtyard, which in the courtyard you find the work of Christ on earth through the laver, which represents baptism, the altar of sacrifice, which represents, of course, his ultimate sacrifice for his people. This is it being set up in Idaho. It takes about, I believe, around 800 to 1,000 man hours to set up. So it's quite a task, usually around 3 days, 4 days to set up.
And the students help?
Yes.
Or the students do all the work?
Yes, generally the students do all the work, and depending on the location where we go to, we ask for volunteers to help us because it is quite an extensive operation. This is actually me working. This is a little later in life. This is me giving a tour in the holy place, explaining Christ's work. There you see the candlesticks, the 7-branch candlestick, and the table of showbread. And in the next picture, you see the most holy place with the Ark of the Covenant, and giving a tour there in Honduras, working in there. But the ministry had such an impact upon my life personally that after college, and actually, Reed, that you mentioned San Diego, I almost went there. That was the year I had graduated a couple months previous to that. And that same month, in November in San Diego, I got a call to go to Africa. And I had left school, had no idea what I was going to do with my life. The ministry had greatly changed my life, but I was still young. I was 19 years old. And I could have easily fallen back into my old habits, into what I was doing before. And I had prayed to God, Lord, just bring me to a place that I can continue growing. I was becoming depressed again and in falling back into just being very dismal about my life. I went to Africa, I went to Zimbabwe, and I spent 5 months there, and it was during a very turbulent time in the economy there. And as I was working there, away from all the distractions that America has to offer, that I rededicated my life to God and said, God, wherever you bring me, I'll go. And when I left Zimbabwe in May of 2009, I got a call from the sanctuary to work for the summer. And I was reading in my Bible because I was praying, Lord, is this what you want me to do? And what God really told to me is that, any man, that has started the work looking back is not fit for the kingdom of heaven. And what he said to me through that verse was, no, keep going, keep working for me. We still have a long ways to go. And I began working in 2009, and for 3 years out of the next 5 years after that period, I spent working with the sanctuary. Some powerful experiences that I really look back on is I remember giving a tour, and after the tour, some woman, she hardly knew any English, and her friend was with her, and she told me, she said, I don't understand English hardly at all. She said, I'm new, but I understood every word you said. And that had happened to other tour guides before, where there was people that didn't understand the English language, that at the end of the tour, they said we understood everything. And that's obviously nothing that we were doing. We were just speaking English to them, but God was putting the words that they needed to hear inside their ears. Other stories, we set up one time at the University of Florida, which is one of the biggest universities in the United States. It's a big party school. We set up right on the campus where the journalism department was. So we had all these journalism students looking for, to get a grade in class, on assignment. So of course, if there's an exhibit there, they're going to go interview people. So the whole campus press on the entire university is like, has stories of the sanctuary being there. And we would bring through students, students are on a tight schedule, and we can't give normal tours about an hour and a half. And we would ask the student, how much time do you have? They might be like 5 minutes, 10 minutes. And we'd give them a tour in 5 minutes or 10 minutes.
Wow.
And some of these kids wouldn't want to leave. Some of these kids would be in tears. We had all sorts, we had Muslims go through, I'm sure, Hindus, Sikhs, every sort of religion, every sort of belief system, atheists, going through the sanctuary and hearing a message of the plan of salvation. And that's Christ's work from the beginning of time until what he's doing now and what he will do in the future. So the great hope that we all have that we'll see Christ come again. Many students, thousands of students got to hear this message being preached to them. You know, there was many times in tours where I would be speaking to people and people would just begin to cry, and it wasn't anything that I was doing, it was the message of Christ's love for them, which is prominent within the sanctuary. You have in the most holy place this mercy and justice coming together, which, you know, represents, you know, Christ and his mercy and his justice and how he's waiting there for every last soul to make a decision for him or not. You know, sometimes we debate, you know, why does Christ tarry? You know, what is he waiting for? And ultimately, you know, Christ is waiting for us. And, you know, I don't know if our viewers who are watching now, you know, Christ may be waiting for you. He may be waiting for me to make that decision for him. You know, the one lost sheep that's out there, God is still looking for to bring back to his fold. And that was the beauty of the sanctuary message, that it connected people to God's understanding, God's love for them, and that God was calling them to a relationship with him. It changed my life sharing that message, and by the grace of God, it impacted many others' lives as well.
So I'm curious, you obviously use the Bible as your source material for this when you were learning as students. And did you use another book besides that, or any other resources?
Yeah, we used a lot of resources, but primarily the Bible. We in the tour, we only share Bible texts and Bible verses. That allows the viewers to be able to either follow along if they've brought their Bible, or when they get home to be able to follow everything we've said through the Word of God. And we want to really establish that. In class, though, we used another really good book called The Cross and Its Shadow by Stephen Haskell. It's an older book that you can find online, or even in some bookstores, you can get it. And that gave a good explanation upon those Bible verses about the history of the sanctuary and how they used it, and really combined the Bible verses into more of a narrative. So.
And of course, you studied Hebrews quite extensively.
Yes, yes. Especially starting in chapter 8, where Paul, you know, says, seeing we have this great ministry, we have a great high priest which is ascended into heavens, which is a minister of the true tabernacle which the Lord pitched and not man. And Paul is trying to bring people's eyes from the earth, which many of the Jewish people were still looking to the earthly temple as being the means of their salvation. He's trying to get them to look at the heavenly temple where Christ is presently, and to show them what he is doing presently now. And that's where in the tour is really where we're trying to guide people's minds to Christ's heavenly work, that when Jesus went back into heaven, he just didn't, sit down and is waiting to come, but that he's actually engaged in a work that has meaning and has a process to it. So.
Beautiful. So you find yourself working for Messiah's Mansion after you've graduated from school for several years. And then where did this take you? You've rededicated your life. It obviously changed your life, and you are a very powerful speaker at it, from being someone who doesn't even like public speaking. And now where has that taken you?
Well, like you said before, I mean, it opened up so many opportunities for me to share, and opportunities to grow in Christ. I believe that the only way that we can really grow is if we share what we know. And I hardly knew anything when I began sharing. But people's lives, by the grace of God, were still impacted and still changed. And that, to me, was a miracle within itself, that God can use anyone, regardless of how little they know, to further the work. God is asking for anything if we make himself available to him. In between that time of working for those 3 years for the sanctuary, God led me to further my studies at a school called Amazing Facts College of Evangelism, up close to Sacramento, California. And I went there by faith. I had decided that I wanted to learn a little bit more about you know, the Bible and even more some theological classes. And I was planning to go to this one evangelism school, and I didn't feel peace about it. And I remember I canceled that trip. And the very next day, I got a call from this school, and they asked me to come to that school, and that someone had paid for me. And no one really knew about this, but God knew. And that had been my story in Africa. When I went to Africa, I had got a check in the mail to go. And I had never even asked anybody for any money. It's just, and that had followed like my entire life. I had to travel in Africa, and people would come and just, you know, right when I needed money, people would provide. I was only making about, I think, less than $500 a month, you know, working with the sanctuary. It's a ministry, and God just kept providing through me throughout the story. And one verse I love in 2 Timothy 2:13, which is a warning verse, but it also is a verse that really shows us God's character. And it says, you know, pretty much that if we are faithless, he is still faithful. He cannot deny himself. And in context, that verse is a warning for us that we need to be faithful, because God is faithful to his word. That means what he says in his word, he is going to do. And I experienced that working in ministry over and over and over again, that as I went out in faith, even not seeing, you know, how things would work out, God always provided for me. Because when we work for God, it's up to him to do it. It's not on our plate. So it gives us a great sense of peace. And over that time working, you know, the depression that I experienced as a child, deep depression, began to be withdrawn. And I began to have a peace in my heart and a relationship with Christ that I had always desired and wanted.
Powerful.
That's amazing. Is there anything that from your experience, that you would tell others or encourage others to do, like to witness to others, or what would you say?
I'd say for maybe our listeners today, or for anyone, when I talk to people, I really encourage people to share. That's in any capacity. You have to engage yourself with sharing what you know in order for your own spiritual growth to grow. So regardless if you feel like you know a little bit, or if you know a lot, or even if you don't know anything, like you know, anything, you can start, you know, in a nursing home, you know, working with the homeless, working with any sort of people, and just being available for God. You know, a simple prayer that changed my life was, Lord, help me to know you. And I prayed that prayer over and over and over again, not even knowing what it meant. But at the end of my, you know, working in ministry and working, sharing the message, I found that I had a relationship with God, and it was more valuable to me than anything in my previous life that I had placed value in. So my biggest encouragement for others is to start somewhere, regardless of what you know. Share it.
Well, thank you, Oliver, for sharing really how God has not only led you, but is still leading you in your life, and how you stayed committed and you have a desire to share. And the experiences in Messiah's Mansion, I think, are resonated through a lot of people that really demonstrate that the sanctuary is an illustration of God's love. And so we'd like to thank everyone for joining in to iTestify. Please visit us at LLBN.TV for more views.